Let's go right to a debate that's taking place in Minnesota. You know, we just spent the other day talking about Minnesota nice. And I guess this was a nice way for Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota to remind Minnesotans that the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Dr. Scott Jensen, was, I don't know, is it fair to call him a pill mill?
Yes, I think in the top 94 percentile, as Walz points out, in the state.
Well, that's pretty up there.
Yeah. I'd be happy about that if that was my
but it's
ACT
not like
tests.
But it's not exactly. But it's not like, you know, he was dispensing these pills because he was like being wined and dined by pharmaceutical exec. Oh, well, let's tune into this.
IC News Now.
Many of our viewers have reached out about the ongoing opioid crisis affecting communities big and small. According to the Minnesota Department of Health, nearly 1,300 people in this state died last year from an overdose. That is up 20% from 2020. Now, rainbow fentanyl pills, looking like candy, have reached Minnesota. Authorities first finding the brightly colored fentanyl, which could appeal to kids, in Mankato last month. As governor, what specifically would you do to address this ongoing crisis and save lives? The question going to Governor Walz first.
Yeah, the opioid crisis, it continued to accelerate. We've seen this in Minnesota. It's even disproportionately hits our communities of color, especially our indigenous communities. Certainly the idea of stopping them at the border, but there's a lot of things that we can do on the front end, making sure that we're stopping that demand, making sure that we have the current services available. I want to say one thing I'm really proud of in Minnesota. Minnesota was one of the states that sued the manufacturers who were making this. This opioid pandemic started, and some of you have seen the shows, you've seen the documentaries that have been done on this, that they started pushing these things for profit and ended up spreading into our communities. That's where most of this has come from. And I have to say, I want to be very clear about this. They didn't do it alone. When Scott was issuing opioid prescriptions, he issued more than 94% of his peers. He did that at the same time while accepting meals from the manufacturers and the pharmaceutical companies, wining and dining on expensive meals. And then he did an expose that was in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune that was entitled Confessions of a Prescription Drug Pusher, where Scott acknowledged that their impact on him and marketing impacted his prescribing of those. It's getting at the front end of this. It's understanding why it got it out there. It's doing what the state of Minnesota did, suing, and then putting in processes to both capture the opioids before they get there and working with folks who are in recovery. Minnesota can do that.
Thank you, Governor Walz. Dr. Jensen, you have 90 seconds.
Without question, the fentanyl that plagues us today is taking a tremendous number of lives. I think over 100,000 drug overdose deaths in 2021, and 2/3 of those were fentanyl. In the 1980s and the 1990s, there was absolutely a heavy-duty pharma push to encourage physicians to use more narcotics and opiates. We actually had another vital sign, which was the pain management level. What's your pain level, 1 through 10? And if we didn't ask that, we weren't, quote, doing good medicine. So I don't disagree with Tim Walz that physicians and the healthcare system have contributed to the problems. And in terms of going out to dinner and having an educational event, yeah, that could happen as well.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is...
You know, Listen, I think Wallace did a good job here, but you got to sort of close the loop. If this guy is out there, more than 94% of his peers, being swayed by a couple of educational, so-called educational events, you know, junkets that maybe just took place in the Caribbean, or just some nice dinners and maybe a couple of pens and a little tchotchkes. This is not exactly the guy you want in charge of the entire, budget of the state of Minnesota.
Yeah.
The guy is basically saying, more than 94% of my peers, I am really open to being lobbied, and either it takes very little, a nice dinner, or just an educational pitch, and I will not only be open to lobbying, but to being convinced that these opioids are special opioids that are not addictive. And I would also, I didn't read that piece then where he was sort of his confessional. But at one point, at one point, do you not realize this is going on? Yeah. Because at one point, maybe you do. And you just, they're being nice to me over at the place. I mean, these guys are nice guys.
Yeah, and after part we cut, he goes on to say, yeah, we need to stop this stuff at the border, which is just wild to see somebody who was prescribing this stuff over his peers to say, yeah, it's coming across the border.
I mean, at this point, it may be coming across the border, but it's coming across the border to satiate an addiction that was started in his office.
Right.
Those opioid stories get me really upset. I mean, I just got back from Vegas from those tort lawyers, and those guys did a lot of this. And they, some hit the corporations that manufactured it, some hit the PBMs that basically distributed it to the pill mills. It really is extraordinary the amount of damage that created in this country. Well, we don't have time to go into like some broad omnibus problem, but I'm not convinced that part of the difficulty we had in terms of public health in dealing with COVID wasn't in some part a function of what we had just gone through, where our public health system essentially, not public, but our health system essentially created a massive bump in the death rate amongst Americans. Like actuarially, our life expectancy went down in this country for, I think, particularly white males, because you had doctors and pharmacies handing out this stuff. And that almost sounds too benign, but really horrific damage across the board. All right, we're going to get to Daniel Squadron in just a moment. He's the co-founder and executive director of the States Project. Obviously, a lot of state houses in play coming up in the fall, and that's it. Well, fall. I mean, we're here 3 weeks out.